Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of October 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to have Vanessa Beeley with us and also David Scott. A lot happening, Mike.
Absolutely, a lot happening. Well, let's start with this organisation, the NCTJ. This is the sort of mainstream media in the UK. This is their effort to train the next generation of journalists, and they also give awards and so on. Well, they've just published this, which is a list of the 238 most respected journalists as nominated by journalists in the 2018 Journalists at Work survey. Now, this is a survey which normally the NCTJ only runs every 10 years, and the last one was in 2006, I think. So, or no, well, I can't remember anyway. I think they're 6 years into the 10-year cycle anyway, and they've decided that things have changed so much in the arena of journalism that they wanted to bring this forward by 4 years. So anyway, as you can see, it's a list of the great and the good. It actually goes on for about 5 pages. I've just got 2 of the pages here, but you can see Telegraph, Guardian, New Yorker, BBC, of course. But if you look down on the first page, actually, we see that name, Vanessa Beeley.
I think we've come across her before,
Mike. Think we have. So let me welcome Vanessa to the programme. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa. How does it feel to be included in the list of the great and the good there?
I think I'm still in delayed shock, actually. I'm almost at the point of sort of no comment on that. I mean, I was extremely surprised. Someone actually sent me the list yesterday and told me that I'd been included. I did quite like the fact that they qualify me as a blogger, despite the list that I'm in the 238 most trusted journalists. I am still listed as a blogger rather than affiliated to any of the, how dare we, independent media sites.
So do you trust your new colleagues? Okay, that's an unfair question. Let me ask a better question. What's the reaction been amongst your new colleagues?
The reaction amongst my new colleagues has been one of shock and horror, I would say, an immediate reaction that what on earth are they talking about? I'm just a vile propagandist for Putin or Assad or any one of these other villains that are being portrayed as villains by the mainstream media. In fact, there was one so-called academic who tweeted out, I believe he's involved in the media and journalism department in the University of Kent, who tweeted out yesterday that I am not a journalist. I am, what did he say? I believe his words were, I am a vile tool or propagandist for Assad and Putin. So my reply to that was, well, this is the current modern academic standard, that if someone who is educated and informed happens to disagree with you, they must be the tool of the villains that are being portrayed as villains by the corporate media, of course. And this is, I mean, it's extraordinary. So, yeah, there has been outrage in Twitter sphere from the propagandist cartel, including Oliver Cam, who almost wanted to unblock me in order to find out how I was doing.
Yes.
But decided against it.
Yeah, okay. Well, look. Yes, absolute comedy.
I was just going to say, of course, when we see that list includes BBC people, some of them are declared openly, but we're now in the situation where we've got BBC journalists for democracy embedded in local newspapers. So when the Shropshire Star appears on that list, for example, is that a real Shropshire Star person, or is it an embedded BBC person?
Very good question. Well, look, let's move on to somewhat more serious stuff. You published this on 21st Century Wire a few days ago. Sweden, a bloody massacre barely registered by Western media as ISIS slaughter innocent civilians in their sleep. We're obviously talking about Syria here, but the point here is this got almost no coverage in the mainstream press.
No, and coming back to the BBC and other of those trusted journalists on the list, I mean, what was extraordinary was that this was literally one of the bloodiest massacres of the entire conflict carried out on the 25th of July 2018. And it has barely registered on the media stories in the West. despite the fact that 270 civilians were massacred by the ISIS terrorists. ISIS terrorists who, by the way, managed to traverse a pretty big area of open desert between the Al Tanf US military base and Sweida city and the surrounding villages in the Sweida countryside. So while the British or the UK MOD, while the US coalition are purporting or excusing their presence in Syria as being the fight against ISIS, a huge number of ISIS militants managed to travel with vehicles across a desert area, invade these villages and Sweida city at around 4 a.m. in the morning to massacre civilians while they lay sleeping in their beds. A disabled child was beheaded while he was sleeping. Entire families, with the actual representative of the villagers who came with us, he lost 35 members of his family during this attack. Civilians were left to bleed to death in the streets because ISIS encircled the villages and lined the roads connecting the villages. So anybody trying to leave in their car with injured relatives or even trying to go and help other civilians were being sniped, and then civilians were unable to go and collect the bodies or to help the wounded. But what is clear is that this attack could not have happened without the collusion or the collaboration of the US military base and the US coalition in Syria, because it couldn't have covered that amount of territory. And of course, the perimeter of the Al Tanf base is seen as a protection area or a buffer zone for the ISIS terrorists. That's why when they've carried out these attacks, they head back in that direction, because they know that the Syrian Arab Army and its allies can't follow it into any proximity to the US base. So effectively, the US is providing cover for the ISIS terrorists. It's also allowing them to move freely in areas that it must be surveying. I mean, I don't believe that an area that is within a few hundred kilometers of the US base is not under surveillance by US drones or equipment. So clearly this attack was in order to also enable the ISIS fighters to escape from the Yarmouk Basin, which was in the process of being liberated at that point. So everything points towards the collusion and collaboration of the US coalition with the ISIS terrorists to carry out this attack, and it's been virtually ignored by the media in the West.
Well, it has indeed been pretty much ignored by the media in the West, and Channel 4 News, of course, who have had reports from Syria in the past, but mostly from people that are embedded within the terror. Is that unfair to say that the people that they've had to report in the past have been embedded with terrorist organizations?
Absolutely. I mean, their camerawoman, Wa'ad al-Khatib, whose husband, Hamza al-Khatib, was supposedly a doctor, although we discovered that actually he had never finished his final medical exams at Aleppo University. And Hamza al-Khatib, Wa'ad's husband, has been pictured with the beheaders of the 12-year-old Palestinian child, Abdullah Isa, who was beheaded in July 2016 in East Aleppo. Wa'ad al-Khatib, although she was offered safe passage out of East Aleppo during the final days of the liberation, she chose to be evacuated with the armed groups dominated by, of course, Al-Qaeda and Nusra Front inside Syria. So it was basically Wa'ad al-Khatib who was the producer of most of the Channel 4 video reports from inside East Aleppo. And we know that Channel 4 basically ignored West Aleppo, as did so many other Western media channels, during the situation of the siege of East Aleppo by the terrorist groups that were effectively lionized, protected, and defended by media outlets like Channel 4.
Okay, well let's look at Jon Snow then, Channel 4's Channel 4 News sort of main anchor. Now, Alison Banville, who's from BS News, asked him some questions, well, she began. She said, "I can't seem to find any reference to the Sweida massacre by ISIS in Syria on the Channel 4 News website. Has it been reported at all by the programme? Considering 250 civilians were killed, it would seem newsworthy. Jon Snow's response on screen at the moment. Alison, I'm pretty sure we did report it on Channel 4 News. I will try to track it down. Thanks for drawing me attention. That's his typo, I should say. And then on the 7th of October, she wrote back and said, further to your reply to me below regarding the horrific Sweden massacre in Syria, in which you say you think Channel 4 News covered it, but you'll check. There still appears to be nothing about it on Channel 4 News website. Did the programme really not cover this atrocity? And if not, the question must be asked, why? And he said, hi, Alison, alas, since our last communication, our correspondent Wad has had to flee for her life. Like everyone else, we're very stretched in Syria. We're now very dependent upon stringers. We have never been able to verify what happened, as in so many other cases, and we're reluctant to go beyond what we can verify for ourselves. I'm sorry if this displeases you, but the fake news, unsupported claims do Syria's agony and loss no favours. So Alison wrote back and said, thanks for getting back to me. I'm interested in the circumstances of Wad having to flee for her life. From whom? Can I also ask, did you read Vanessa Bailey's piece? I'm just trying to clarify if you're saying her report contains unsupported claims. And Jon Snow gave this reply, Alison, you should be first to criticise this quite rightly. Were we to disclose the nature of the threats, please, if you love Syria, don't seek to imperil her citizens, especially the tender likes of Wad, and the evils perpetrated by the British, the Americans, the Russians, and the Syrian government itself, let alone ISIS and all the other crackpots. Thanks at least for your concern. So Alison wrote back and said, sorry, John, could I ask, re your mention of Wad, didn't she leave Syria in 2016? And wasn't she based in Aleppo when in the country? I'm just wondering, as Sweden is way down in the south. And lastly, you referred to the evils perpetrated in Syria by the British and Americans. Could you be more specific on that? And Jon Snow said, well, Alison, in the kindest, nicest possible way, I have a very full-on, diverse and difficult job to do. I cannot go on with this dialogue. I've given you a lot more time than I've given many others who write to me. I'm afraid I can't take this any further. So poor old Jon Snow doesn't really seem to have any answers there.
Well, no, and I mean, what is extraordinary is that we've called out Jon Snow in particular and Channel 4, of course, on their appalling reporting on Syria from the beginning. But Jon Snow in particular, if we go back to the end of November 2016, Jon Snow ran with a story on Jebel Qubba, an area of East Aleppo, where he immediately claimed that the regime, as he called it, the Syrian government, had bombed its own civilians trying to flee the area to the safety of the humanitarian corridors. Now, going through it very quickly, at this point, Jon Snow even accused publicly in an interview with Faris Shahabi, one of the MPs in Aleppo and head of the Chamber of Commerce, of actually murdering his own constituents. What transpired afterwards is that Jon Snow had relied entirely on unverified sources, i.e. the White Helmets, who effectively had carried out the crime against the very civilians that Jon Snow was claiming had been massacred by the Syrian government. So while Jon Snow is taking the moral high ground here with Alison, he clearly hasn't adhered to his own ethics or his own claim to journalist ethics when he has clearly used unverified sources, as have his colleagues on a number of occasions. And it appears that no, Channel 4 has not reported on the Sweden massacre, which is an appalling, I don't even know what you would call it, an appalling media oversight on their part to ignore effectively the possible collusion of Western governments in a massacre of 270 civilians, but also the injury to 300 more. So, I mean, this is huge.
Okay, well, look, let's move back to the BBC then, and Jeremy Bowen, because he's just come back from Syria and posted this. This was posted yesterday. This video: Syria War: Why I Fight Alongside Assad's Forces Near Idlib. Well, give us a little bit of background to this video and what your thoughts are on Bowen's coverage of it.
Well, I mean, what is extraordinary here and what must be highlighted is that I'd gone to this village, Al Skalbiya, which is a Christian village to the north of the Hama province on the border with Idlib. So on the border with the terrorist groups who have occupied the province of Idlib. Now, first of all, Bowen describes Nabal al-Abdallah, who's the head of the volunteer civil defense forces who defend the Christian town from the terrorist incursions and mortar attacks and cluster bomb attacks, actually, that I arrived one day after a cluster bomb attack on the civilians of this village. Saying that Nabal al-Abdallah would call the Syrian army Assad's forces is a complete misleading title on this. They are not Assad's forces. These are the civil defense forces. They're local volunteer forces. But even the Syrian army is not Assad's force. It is of the people and for the people. So again, immediately in the opening of this report, Bowen is spinning it against the Syrian government, or portraying an aspect of the Syrian government that simply doesn't exist. And the written report, the disparity that I've picked up between the written report and the video report is that in the written report, of course, Bowen returns to default position, describing the terrorist groups as the rebels, downplaying the existence or the numbers of the terrorist groups and fighters that are occupying Idlib, who of course have come in from the liberated areas of Syria into Idlib province and are now occupying it, preventing civilians leaving, using civilians as human shields, shelling the humanitarian corridor that is there to enable them to exit safely. Yet all of this was eradicated from his report. The blame was laid squarely at the feet of the Syrian government, as always, or the Syrian regime, as Bowen loves to call it. And of course, this report came out at the same time as the BBC Two report on the Assad dynasty, as they call it.
Okay, look, we're gonna have to move on. Vanessa, just before we end this segment, obviously, like us all, you need support. How can people help you, support you in the work that you're doing?
Well, I would like to say a huge thank you, first of all, to people who have donated to my Patreon account. But if people do feel up to donating as little as $1 a month, everything helps to enable me to actually go to Syria and go elsewhere and do the work that I do. So thank you.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for joining us. Just stick with us for 1 second, because I just want to get one small comment from you on this, because Jonathan Allen, was speaking in the United Nations yesterday. He, of course, the UK Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, and in amongst the usual nonsense that he was talking, he said the UK champions a whole of government, whole of society approach to prevention of terrorism, which is reflected in the UK's newly refreshed counter-terrorism strategy contest. Now, we've been talking over the last couple of days about this whole of government, whole of society approach that the government is taking. This is the fusion doctrine. But I was interested in the newly refreshed counter-terrorism strategy contest, because contest hasn't been, or the last version of contest that I saw was from 2011 or something like that. So I went and had a look at the new version of contest, and well, here it is. And a couple of things jumped out at me. I haven't had a chance to look at it in detail. But the first thing that jumped out at me was this graph, which claims to be displaying deaths from terrorism 2000 to 2016. And the main blocks that it's got on there are Turkey and Israel, OECD member countries, rest of the world, Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And it's interesting that the comment that you were just making there, Vanessa, about Jeremy Bowen not calling people terrorists, calling them freedom fighters. Because the fact is, I think you'd agree that one of the most significant conflicts that has taken place during that period, 2000 to 2016, is the Syrian conflict, and it has a very large representation of terrorists taking part in it. Certainly as significant as Iraq, because this document is mainly about ISIS, and ISIS a major player in Syria. So the fact that Syria is not on this list in the same way that Iraq is or Afghanistan is, I think gives us a clue that the government is not viewing these people as terrorists. And we've already noticed that the BBC is not viewing these people as terrorists. So this seems like a bit of a coincidence that these two bodies are taking this view.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting, isn't it? And I think it's also particularly interesting. I'm now just thinking out loud that the Dutch government, of course, has recently withdrawn its financing of Mayday Rescue, the intermediary for the White Helmets that secures makes sure that the British funding goes to the White Helmets in Syria, because the Dutch government cannot be sure that these finances are not ending up in the hands of the terrorist groups. The BBC Panorama itself, of course, made the programme about the Free Syrian Police and the same issue. So is this a protectionist exercise, again, by the BBC to play down the existence of the terrorist groups inside Syria, and to protect the fact that the British government, of course, has been effectively, through its humanitarian aid programme, financing those terrorist groups?
Yeah. Okay, look, thank you very much for joining us, Vanessa. That has been fantastic. Now let me bring David Scott into the programme, because David, there was one other part of this that jumped out at me, and it was this. In the UK and Europe, the quote goes, extreme right-wing groups, including neo-Nazis, seek to exploit any anxieties around globalisation, conflict and migration, including any which they're able to link to the Syria conflict, in an attempt to broaden their appeal. You know, we've been talking about this for quite some time as well, since David Cameron's speech to the United Nations General Assembly in 2015, that anybody that has countered the narrative, I mean, that seems to be quite a broad thing. Anxieties about globalization, anxieties about war, anxieties about migration. We're all being called right-wing extremist groups. And of course, Contest is all about dealing with the likes of us, it seems.
The likes of us, yes. Who would have thought that the lovely Vanessa Beeley is, in fact, literally Hitler? But that seems to be what they're saying. And in fact, so is everybody else, because what that is suggesting is if you question the official narrative at all, that becomes an extreme right-wing position. So any sort of questioning becomes verboten, becomes actually criminal, or at least despicable. Or what was it? The Clinton lassie used deplorables. Yeah, it's an extension of deplorables, but it's now becoming more serious, because we're not just deplorable. We are
presenting information which may not be appropriate information.
Yes, and we know that local councils are absolutely getting on board this, so that if you come up with a subject for your debate which the local council doesn't like, they can invoke prevent legislation in order to close down your venue. If the wider population in UK really understood how dangerous this sort of legislation is, we would start to see some real and appropriate change. But of course, the job of the BBC, for example, is to make sure that none of this gets out to the wider public. So it's left to us, and if we do that, then we're now to be accused of being right-wing. I actually find this particularly insulting that it's not even MPs, because we know the policies coming from deep within think tank units inside this corrupt Conservative government, that they dare to point a finger at the public, accusing them of being right-wing because you disagree with the government. But you were keen to include this segment. I've also got something to add on this, but Sky News reporting that the soldier in the Tommy Robinson video to be discharged from the army. What's your take on this, David?
Well, here again, we're seeing everything's being limited. We'll come to some of the things that have been said about the army on the back of this, but you have a man who's free, who's not saying things which, even in the current very restricted world, are deemed illegal or unsayable. But if you have your photograph taken with him, well, we're very sorry, we'll have to lose you from the army. So we're sending a very clear message. We're sending the message that this is beyond the pale. You will not ask these questions. You will not engage in this debate, because to engage in a debate, to ask the questions, to look at things and use your natural intelligence to understand the world around you, becomes right-wing, and extreme right-wing, and dangerous, and we don't want you. So that's one part of it. They talk about far-right, I quote, far-right ideology is at odds with the values and ethos of the armed forces. So again, without defining far-right, it's just a bogey word, but we're not going to have it.
That leads on to this Guardian article. The Tommy Robinson photos show how far right the British Army is.
Now, this is a real shocker, right? I'll read a paragraph from this because it's really astounding. So he asked the question, the author here is an ex-soldier, Joe Glenton, writing in The Guardian. He asks, does this mean the army is now the BNP with berries, ? No, but in some respects, the UK military, the institution rather than the people, is itself a far-right organisation. On the one hand, it is anchored to a violent colonial past that it gleefully celebrates. On the other, that the army operates according to ideas which are recognisably of the right. Notice how the right and the far right are becoming one and the same. Submission, obedience, unaccountable power, nationalism, commitment to remaking the world with lethal radicalised violence. I wasn't aware that the British Army's policy was a commitment to remaking the world with lethal radicalised violence, but there you go, and so on. Other visible far-right traits include a selective reading of history. The MOD's recent marking of Black History Month celebrated soldiers, sailors, and airmen of colour, but failed to mention Britain's century-long military domination of Indians, Africans, and others. And he continues here, what incentive is there, we might ask, to be multiculturalist when so much military identity, for example, the battle honours embroidered on your unit's colours, stems from the names of Indian or Afghan towns whose mutinous citizens were ravaged, robbed, and raped by the warrior ancestors you toast in the mess in the evenings. So what we're saying here is, one, you must hate your history, you must hate your people. Two, you must have a very, very partial reading of history, because it's only crimes alleged or real of the British that you need to be concerned about, not what anyone else was doing. Presumably, all these other races are not held to the same standards. I don't know quite how the racism works, but it's in there somewhere. And you must detest who we are. And if you don't buy into this, then you are far right. And the very institution of the army, and I'm sure the Navy is the same, and I'm sure the RAF is the same, these become far-right institutions. So it's another example of the core institutions that made Britain Britain are being attacked, criticised, and deconstructed one by one.
David, thank you for that analysis. I think there's also another level here. I think this is really part of a preemptive strike by the establishment on the military, because they are now beginning to get the buzz, the military would call it, the gossip, where people inside Britain's armed forces are waking up to the fact that they've been utterly betrayed by all three parties. And of course, we can see this betrayal at the moment, particularly with Theresa May and the Conservatives, who have sold out Britain's military to the European Union unified military system under the smokescreen of Brexit. There's some very interesting documents coming forward. The Chequers document, we know, simply left out the word defence. It used security. I think this is a very worried establishment now trying to crush the armed forces, who they fear a lot, because of course if those armed forces stood up for what is right in this country, the political establishment's got a problem. But we've got a little bit of video here of Tommy Robinson, which I thought was important. So we're going to just have a listen to this, a look at this and a listen, and we'll follow it with another person speaking, and then we'll have a bit of discussion.
I spoke to so many soldiers today who said the only way you get promoted is if you're a mixed race lesbian. These diversity programs that are being enforced on them, and basically you're more likely to get sacked and kicked out of the army because of if you had a problem with diversity than you are if you fiddled with a child. What is going on? What is going on? How come again the priority given to, if you talk out against an ideology, if you talk out against Islam, that's what this is about. It's about the forced common purpose that's being spread through every institution of Britain. But now you've tried it with the armed forces, and I hope now you're going to have a review in the armed forces. And that's not what I want. That's not what I want. Do you know what has most shocked me over the last 2 days? It's finding out how low the morale is in our armed forces. It's at the rock bottom. They are all fed up. They're fed up, they're undermanned, they're understaffed, they're treated like dirt. They're not rewarded, they're not respected. And then you try and destroy one of their lives at the age of 17 and ruin his career because he has a photo of a journalist. So I'm travelling. Even I'm going back tonight from up north because I've got a flight to catch in the morning. I'm travelling everywhere, and I'm meeting our armed servicemen. And the ones I met today didn't want their faces shown. Wasn't bothered about having their faces shown. They didn't care. They said they can't discharge us all. It is literally, I am Spartacus. Okay? They can't discharge everyone.
I'll put some text at the end of that. We've just okay. Let's say come to the point. This man says very clearly in the middle of that he doesn't understand what's going on, and this is very, very important because we've got Tommy Robinson getting very emotional. There's underlying anger, but what he's telling us very clearly is he's seeing all these things happen, and he says, I don't understand it. I don't understand what's going on here. So that was Tommy Robinson. Now, of course, he's branded a right-wing ultra extremist because of his views on Islam, but the state wants to hate Tommy Robinson. Now have a look at this individual and listen to what he says.
For the life of me, think of a time in recent British political history, and my history isn't good enough to know about some of the other sort of key issues. I know what the Suez Crisis was, I know how it happened and how it unfolded, but I don't know what was really happening in Parliament at the time. Don't ring me to tell me, we'll save that for another day. But I cannot for the life of me think of a parliamentary landscape that looked as confused and as confusing as the current one. And I've got a horrible feeling that's why we are sort of being discouraged from talking about it. Why on earth have the Times led with employers must reveal ethnic pay gap of staff on a day when the parliamentary arithmetic is such that we could see any one of a dizzying array of cataclysmic occurrences unfold in the next 2 or 3 weeks?
Confused. That was the key bit there, that James O'Brien is saying that he's confused. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's looking in a political scene. At least he's brave enough to admit that he hasn't done his research on what was happening in Parliament at Suez. But he's clearly saying he also now is looking at his window and he doesn't understand. David, what we're looking at here is orchestrated breakdown in the country. And we've got two different sections of community. I'm going to say Tommy Robinson on one hand, but we've now got a journalist with LBC saying, I'm watching things I don't understand. What do you think's going on?
Well, this is very interesting because what this is an attack, but it's an attack on everything that holds a society together. Right? The language is being deconstructed, but every institution we have is being deconstructed. There's going to be a point where there's nothing fixed, nothing you can rely on, nothing you can believe in. Now, what does that do to a country? It destabilizes it. So what we're seeing is destabilization.
What we're seeing is destabilization. I think you're spot on with that. And you saw this comment from this Scottish MEP talking about common purpose. Sorry, let me just read it out for people who are listening in with us. Common purpose is invading our army. Officers must pull together against any senior officers who sell out for promotion. This is how the police force was destroyed. And this is David Coburn, MEP. This is quite extraordinary that we've now got an MEP recognising the damage being done to important organisations within the country by a political agenda called common purpose.
Indeed, and this is it's very, very informed comment. I was speaking to a retired senior Scottish police officer just during the week, and he was explaining how policing has changed and the skills and nature and approach, the very core of what policing was, is almost unknown now. And you have the top echelons have sold out or have been bought out, and the new recruits have been trained in something that's completely different. So the nature of policing has changed. The relationship between the public and the police changes as a result. And all of a sudden, you don't have a recognizable police force as we used to know it. It becomes entirely something different. And we know it's being also militarily trained. There's huge amounts of weapons training going on in the Scottish police forces now, and no one's talking about that either. So it changes the nature of the institution. We don't want that done to our armed forces.
We certainly don't. Let's just remind people that it was almost exclusively the UK column that was warning about Common Purpose, the charity, the political charity. And here we are with Julia Middleton, the chief executive, back in 2007. And her quote was, "I know that in Downing Street, they're always wondering whether people have sufficient guile to be brought into a coalition the government is forming." So the chief executive of a charity is mixing at deputy prime minister level. That was John Prescott's office. And she was aware that the government was seeking out people with cunning who were prepared to deceive the public because they were going to create a new political forum. And that was going to be the coalition. But let's follow it through, because we've shown this many times before, but now it's really coming to its own. Here were two Conservatives who about 5 years ago were warning the public as to what was coming. And the quote from Nicholas Bowles MP is, "The Prime Minister and his deputy Nick Clegg want their people power revolution to unleash chaotic effects across local communities. Chaotic, therefore, in our Conservative vocabulary, is a good thing." And Danny Kruger, who was trying hard to become an MP at that time, said the Conservatives plan to introduce a period of creative destruction in public services. We've now got that destruction, David. It's coming in so thick and fast that we can see Tommy Robinson's confused, O'Brien from LBC's confused. The BBC is part of the propaganda machine covering it up. We need to take the lid off this.
And if we're going to censor by calling people right wing and putting them in right wing boxes, and therefore we don't have to listen to them, we've got this moving forward as well. So here's Breitbart here. The good censor leaked Google briefing admits abandonment of free speech for safety and civility. So this is a briefing which Breitbart got their hands on, and it was, well, Google claims it was only an internal research paper, but the point is that they seem to be spending a heck of a lot of money on this internal research paper, so it must be more than that. And Breitbart, quoting pages 66 to 68, saying the briefing argues that Google, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter are caught between two incompatible positions: the unmediated marketplace of ideas versus well-ordered spaces for safety and civility. And the first is described as a product of the American tradition, which prioritizes free speech for democracy, not civility. And the second is described as a product of the European tradition, which favors dignity over liberty and civility over freedom. So the briefing is claiming that all tech platforms are now moving towards the European tradition. But then we were sent this today, and thank you very much to the person who sent it. This is entitled Anticipatory Regulation, a way forward for platform governance. And this is from an organization called Inform. Brian Cathcart, who is the head of this organization, is Common Purpose. So this is Common Purpose Infiltrated. Well, this is a proposal that they're promoting, a proposal from Nesta, who is one of the big what do you call them, an NGO, which is providing money to a whole load of other change agents. Is that a fair?
Political change agent, so yeah.
So what are they saying here? Well, here we go. Hopefully over time, structures and institutions of anticipatory regulation would enable the creation of a different, more collaborative and consensual culture among actors that are so evidently and inextricably interdependent. Constructive engagement is the key, and not a single actor poses the knowledge necessary to govern these technologies in the right direction. They say, hopefully, Perhaps more importantly, we need to break away from stifling and burdensome binaries to regulate or not to regulate, top-down or bottom-up regulation, permissive or restrictive, rules or principles, platforms or publishers, infrastructure or content, etc. These are no longer appropriate conversations, and they're not constructive. So we're tearing apart our definitions of or at least we don't want to be binary anymore. We've got to be on a spectrum, and we're going to regulate in an anticipatory way rather than having it defined in black and white. And it's going to be collaborative. So as a platform does something, the regulator is going to work with them to make sure that whatever they do is the right thing, and so on. David, I don't even know where to start with this.
What does it even mean? What does anticipatory regulation mean?
It means they're going to bring in It means they're going to bring in regulation before something is actually developed.
That's it.
That's what it is. So you can't move because you might consider to do anything tomorrow, and they're going to regulate against that. It's known as the thought police.
Yes, it is known as the thought police, and this crystal ball gazing is cropping up a lot. It's in child protection as well, because the state's going to look into the future and decide what might in future happen, and act now for something that doesn't exist because they have decided the future is indicating that this is necessary. So is it just an excuse for any arbitrary action that they consider appropriate at any time for any reason?
Well, we'll see. I've got an eye on the clock. Let's just do this very quickly. We better bring in the BBC because we always need the BBC. But we've got James Landale tweeting out, ever wondered how BBC News at 10 comes together? Here's how. He says, go to the Media Masters podcast, which is life in the newsroom running the BBC's flagship news programme for 20 million viewers. Listen to the full interview with Paul Royal, who's the boss. We got George Alagaya, let's bring him in. You see the news presenters on air, but behind them is a skilled professional team at the BBC News at 6 and 10. At the top of this is this man, our editor, Paul Royal. Great insight into what goes on before the title sequence rolls. Well, in the Twitter page I was looking at, the next BBC item was this one, BBC Entertainment. You've got to look at K-pop. Now, I don't know who these I'm not sure whether they're boy girls or girl boys. I'm not sure what they are or what they're declaring they are today, but the BBC seems to think this is important news. This is the man who sets this stuff up. You have a look at his CV. Well, he was in news before he got into the BBC with ITV, but we're to believe that this man is running a quality news organisation. He's thrilled to lead these outstanding programmes, Mike. You'll be glad to know. They are the most watched, with our audiences central to what we do. He said that in 2013. I'll just bring this up. I had to put out a tweet because I heard on BBC Radio 2 News a couple of days ago, they said this: much of Russia's alleged behaviour could have been avoided. And I pointed out to somebody who was with me that this was pretty interesting. How do you avoid behaviour which actually hasn't been proved to have taken place in the first place?
You can't. It's a bit difficult to avoid an allegation.
Propaganda,
yes,
by the BBC.
Okay, look, we got to mention this. Yesterday, Mark Steele was in court because Gateshead Council had placed an injunction on him, preventing him from speaking out about his concerns over 5G. It was an interim injunction, and the full court hearing was yesterday. Well, as the headline in Chronicle Live here says, judge refuses to gag anti-5G streetlight campaigner, stating the public have a right to know. Now, this article in Chronicle Live is by no means favourable to Mark Steele. They clearly don't like him very much, but anyway, they say that the judge refused to gag him, saying that the issue should be debated. The council denies the various allegations that are being made against 5G and had asked for an injunction, which, the interim injunction prevented him from speaking out or even posting about this on the internet. But the judge, Judge Nolan, said he was not going to keep that sort of level of draconian gagging up. He said the public have a right to know. He said that he was going to impose some sanctions on Mark Steele, basically prohibiting from breaking harassment laws. And well, there's a whole discussion that could be had around that, but also limiting who he can put a camera towards, who you can point a camera towards. So this is a bit of a victory for Mark Steele, it has to be said, and well, a bit of a fail for the Chronicle Live really in their reporting of it, but nonetheless, fantastic news that at least one judge in the country is prepared to stand up for free speech.
Indeed. Now, we're short of time. I think we should just give David his word on.
Look, just before we do, I think we should just mention this because in the course of this court case,
right.
Mark Steele had made the point that, or at least this had come up, and I just wanted to mention it. Gateshead Council has launched its own funeral service, Brian, and I find that quite shocking in many ways because this happened in I think June. They are saying that, well, really, they want to try to lower the prices on funerals, but they are launching their own funeral service. So if Mark Steele is correct about the effects that 5G is having on people, and people are going to be at greater risk of cancer and whatnot, then what's going on here? Is the council then cashing in on this?
Well, and you've got a completely closed loop when it comes to somebody dying, because councils appoint and control coroners. We're now seeing the coroners fully embedded with the police, and therefore you have no independent assessment when somebody dies. I think this is extremely dangerous.
David, what do you think about the councils going into business in competition with commercial organisations that are providing the same service?
It's very strange. You've got an organisation funded out of coercive taxation. It seems somewhat unfair competition. And if you're then looking for where does the capital get attracted to, well, there's only so much capital to go around, and that means it will be sucking capital away from the private sector. Now, the most damaging thing of all is who's deciding on where the investment goes. It's no longer the disparate information contained in the marketplace where it's everyone has a vote every time they spend £1. No, it's a few people in non-smoke filled rooms making decisions for the rest of us. It becomes much more problematic, much more error strewn, and everyone gets poorer as a result.
Okay, look, we are pretty much out of time, but let's do this one. So this is BBC News. We've got a couple of headlines here. First of all, woman billboard removed after transphobia. Roy, and this was somebody who had put a billboard up, a big advertising hoarding up, which gave a definition of a woman, and the definition was that it was a noun, adult human female. Well, that board was taken down, but equally here we have another BBC article suggesting that the word woman should no longer be spelled W-O-M-A-N. It should now be spelled W-O-M-X-N, because really why are we going to do this?
Well, it's to avoid being transphobic, and apparently using the English language is now transphobic. An LGBT activist, who is also a doctor in the NHS, so that's reassuring, complained about the advertising board that said woman meant adult human female. And kept complaining until the advertising company pulled it. Advertising company Prime Site, more on them later, said it had been unaware of the motive behind putting this poster up and had been misled by the campaign's messaging and was fully committed to equality for all. So they ran. And the Wellcome Trust, and we all know we can trust them, the Wellcome Trust were having an exhibition, and they decided it was going to be all about work by women, but we had to pronounce it, we had to spell it with an X, because that makes it clear it's inclusive and diverse and trans friendly and fluid and not certain. So we're breaking down all the barriers. The words no longer mean anything. And the lady who put up the poster who is saying that this has significant effects on women and their rights, is perfectly correct. In one of the interviews she did, she pointed out that an effect of this is that she could be arrested, and that a trans woman who is still biologically a man, but is a WPC, might be asked to strip search her, and that would be entirely legal. So she points out all of the inconsistencies and the dangers presented to women as these barriers are broken down, and she asks for words to mean what they say.
Yeah. Okay, look, we're going to end on this one then. Well, you highlighted this tweet here, David, which includes an embedded video. The headline is, "If only all politicians were this honest."
Yeah, so this is from an American campaign against corruption. And it's a little, quite chubby politician, and he's saying what actually happens here. I encourage people to go and seek out this video. It is absolutely hilarious. Here he's pretending that he doesn't find old people offensive, and here he's standing with his attractive family, and he's telling them that he doesn't listen to these constituents. He's not interested in legislating. He's interested in fundraising, because that's where 70% of his time goes. And he explains that it's all about staying in office, and that what his funders say ultimately matters more than what the constituents want. And he goes in and he explains that these things, education, this is what matters to him. But these are the funders, and they keep him in office. And if they don't like these things he cares about, then his hands are tied, and there's nothing he can do. And on it goes. It's a wonderful advert. It's called Honest Gill. Honest Gill also has an example of net neutrality. There's an advert by Honest Gill on net neutrality as well. Please seek these out. They're absolutely hilarious and very, very honest.
So we end finally. We should give a health warning on this.
We should, yes.
But we end finally on Britain's most honest politician, Brian.
Yeah, well, here it is. This is a report from the Telegraph, so I can't tell you whether it's true or not. It's obviously a mainstream report. But it says that the illustrious Blair has said, look, we need a second referendum, but trust me, if we can have the second referendum, I won't be pushing for a third.
Right. Okay.
So I'm actually going to say I think the Telegraph starting to see through some of the smoke and mirrors. We'll end, we'll end there. Thank you very much, David, and of course, Vanessa, for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Monday. I'd just like to say a big thank you to the audience in the Netherlands. We understand that we're building a bit of an audience now in Holland, so we're delighted to have viewers from the lowlands. And also thank you very much to people who've taken out a subscription with us recently. We do need your support in that way to do what we do. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.